Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Schlesinger. I'm the editor of Bay Nature magazine and excited to have you here this afternoon for Bay Nature Talks about wildlife photography with Vishal Subramanyan. For those of you who don't know, Bay Nature is a nonprofit independent media organization. We are a unique one, a special media organization in that there is nobody else who reports solely on the environment in the San Francisco Bay Area. We publish a quarterly print magazine. And for those of you who are subscribers, hopefully this has reached your mailbox. Sometime in the last few days, our new winter issue is out. And those who are not yet subscribers to the print magazine will be rolling it out online over the weeks and months to come. Let's see, in addition to our quarterly print magazine, we publish a weekly email newsletter, social media channels, websites, and we hold talks like this one, which bring reported stories to life and bring this community that is Bay Nature together. Before we get started with Vishal, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. If you have technical difficulties during the talk today, please know that this is a webinar, we're recording it, and we will send everybody who attended an email that has a link to the webinar so you can rewatch it if you care to. We will have a Q&A at the end of this hour-long conversation for about 20 minutes. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll accumulate those questions and try to get to as many of them as we can by the end of the hour. Let's see, we want to thank everybody who has already made a $20 suggested donation to attend this talk. This is a season of giving, and Bay Nature relies on 50% of its revenue coming from donations, and we don't have big benefactors. We are supported by the community, lots of small donations, and this organization, this idea exists because people like you continue to donate every year and bring this content out to the world. So we invite you to donate and subscribe at baynature.org. Now, it is my real pleasure to introduce to you to today's speaker, Vishal Subramanyan. Vishal is an award-winning wildlife photographer who will be graduating from UC Berkeley in the fall of 24. He is double majoring in ecosystem management and forestry and statistics. And he has had his wildlife photos published in a lot of outlets, including Bay Nature. There's a bobcat photo of Vishal's that we'll be discussing today that was recognized this fall by London's Natural History Museum with a Wildlife Photographer of the Year honor, which is a big deal. So congratulations, Vishal. So we at Bay Nature, the Bay Nature community, which to be clear is anybody who's joining us today, is fortunate and grateful to have you with us today and for you to take some time to talk with us. So let's just get started by hearing a little bit about you. Really, how did you get so into wildlife photography? When did it start? What's your backstory?
Well, thank you so much for having me here today, Victoria. I'm really excited to be here with the Bay Nature community. So I got started in wildlife photography when I went to Alaska with my dad in 2015. Now, I'd always been obsessed with wildlife from a young age. I'd always watch wildlife documentaries. I'd always go out on hikes with my dad. And one event that always fascinated me was bears fishing salmon in Alaska. And in 2015, I got to go with my dad to see this firsthand. And when we were there, I stole his camera and started taking pictures for the first time. And that's really what got me interested in wildlife photography. And since I returned home to the Bay Area, I've been continuing my photography journey since for over 8 years now.
Wow. Wow. So what is it that really has drawn you into wildlife photography and kept you with it? What's the magnet there?
So I would say what drew me to wildlife photography initially was an outlet to explore my passion for nature and wildlife. It allowed me to
Hmm.
connect with wildlife and nature in a way that I had previously only done through a television screen, and it allowed me to
Mm.
experience those moments firsthand. And I think that's what initially drew me to wildlife photography and is still a main motivating factor behind my wildlife photography. I would say over time, my purpose has also expanded, not to just feed my own interest into nature, but also expand that so that other people can enjoy the same fascination with wildlife and nature that I do. So I hope through my photos, I can also connect other people in the Bay Area and beyond with our amazing natural world.
Oh. There was a point in my journalism career where I thought long and hard about, do I want to do environmental written reporting or do I want to do environmental photojournalism? And the reason I was so attracted to the photojournalism idea was the mere idea that the job was to sit in nature and watch wildlife. I was like, what could be better than that? I think the technical side of it didn't, was maybe not really my forte, but is that part of it for you? Just the opportunity to sit and observe?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. There's nothing I enjoy more than being in nature and observing wildlife. Often
Mm.
feel at home in nature. I will say it's definitely not the only or the main part of the job. You know,
Yeah.
um, like like most things, 90% of your job is marketing, sending emails, doing all the
Mhm.
not so pleasant stuff. But doing that stuff is what's able to get you into the field and capture those moments that we all hope to see.
Yeah. Is are your studies at UC Berkeley enabling you to get in the field at all? Is photography any part of your degree, or is it just kind of the side gig for now?
Um, it's I wouldn't say any of my coursework directly relates to photography, but through being at UC Berkeley, I've been able to connect with a lot of amazing researchers who study and work in the conservation of wildlife, and I've been able to use my photography skills to help communicate the science that they're doing here at the university. So one example of that is a photo and video project I'm doing on mountain beavers, which is a research study run by the Department of Integrative Biology at UC Berkeley, and I'm fortunate enough to be a part of that project where I can use my skills and knowledge as a photographer to help communicate the science that's being done. So while it's not a direct part of my coursework, I do feel like there is a close connection between my work and what I'm doing at UC Berkeley because of my ability to connect with scientists and researchers who are working on these issues and topics that I care about and these stories that I want to share with the public.
Yeah, yeah. So once you do graduate in the fall, what do you hope that photography remains part of what you're doing, or what are your aspirations for your work and what you want to do with it?
I'm still trying to figure out exactly what I want to do. Photography has been, I would say, like a major part of my life for the last 8 years, and I expect it to continue to be after college. I would like to pursue some sort of career in wildlife journalism, whether that be photography, filmmaking, or some other sort of avenue, with the ultimate goal of helping to connect the public with our natural world and inform and educate about issues regarding wildlife conservation. So I do expect photography to be a major part of my life and career going forward past
Mm,
graduation.
cool, lucky us.
Mhm.
All right, so without further ado, let's look at some of your work and begin talking about it and learning how you came about it.
Sounds good.
So why don't you go ahead and tell us, Vishal, about this photo? This is the award-winning photograph I mentioned in our introduction. So just start us from I don't know, the months, the days, the minutes before you took this shot, because I kind of imagine these things don't just wander out there one day and it happens. I imagine there's a good bit of forethought.
Yeah, so this was actually surprisingly a very random encounter, and it's actually one of my favorite stories to tell.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
I was hiking with a friend by this old abandoned winery ruins, and there was this tree squirrel sitting in this window of the abandoned winery building. Now, this tree squirrel is maybe like 15, 20 feet high up above the ground in this window. And as we're watching this tree squirrel, just taking pictures and so on, like, not really too interested in the squirrel, but, just stopped for a second. While we're watching the squirrel, this bobcat jumps up from inside the building and catches the squirrel on the window. So this all
Wow.
unfolded right in front of our own eyes. And it took me a few seconds to realize, what's going on here. But then I realized, oh my gosh, there's a bobcat in the window. So the thing is, the
Wow.
bobcat struggled to get back down into the building. So she spent a solid 5 minutes up in that window, just trying to figure out how to get back down, trying to climb down, trying to do various things. And during that time, I was able to capture a lot of pictures of her, this one being my favorite of the sequence. Eventually, she made her way back down into the building and gave the squirrel to the two kittens, to her two kittens, which were also in the building. So it was a really memorable encounter and quite unexpected. Just one of those really lucky moments. And yeah, it was
Wow.
just a really cool experience.
And so you didn't know that there was a mother and two kids in the area?
I did know that they were in like the general like area, but that area encompasses multiple square miles. I know that they
Ah.
have used this building in the past, but it had personally been months since I'd seen them at this particular building in this particular location. So it wasn't an entire surprise to know that there was a bobcat family in the area, but at that particular time, at that particular spot, it was quite unexpected, especially since I had just walked by the building like 30 minutes to an hour earlier and had seen nothing.
Wow. Wow. So it sounds like you were familiar with this particular individual that we're seeing in the photo. What did you learn about her over the period of time that you went to this spot and took photos?
Yeah, so this bobcat's name is Blondie, and I've been watching her since
Oh,
2017. She was
wow.
born in 2015, so she's going on almost 9 years now. And she is a very good bobcat mother and frequently raises litters of 3 to 4 kittens. In this particular year, she had 4 kittens, but unfortunately only two made it. But it's been
Mm.
fascinating to watch her year over year, observe her behavior and patterns over time. And, she she's quite tolerant of our presence in certain scenarios, which means we're able to kind of really get a good glimpse into her life that's normally not possible with bobcats. And yeah, I'm
Hmm.
really fortunate to have watched her over time, watched her raise various kittens over time. And over the years, I've seen her raise, I think, a dozen kittens to adulthood.
Wow. And are there specific, I don't know, sort of behaviors of bobcats that you've learned about in watching her over that, really long period of time?
Yeah, so one behavior I noticed with Blondie is that um, even during the time periods where she had 3 and 4 kittens, she would often take one kitten out at a time, like on rotation. So it's like one day this kitten gets to go out with her, the next day the other kitten gets to go out with her, and that's something I hadn't really seen before with bobcats, and I still haven't seen it with any other individual except her. And some other interesting behavior I've seen is bobcat kittens are generally supposed to stop nursing after 2 months, but I've seen her nursing her kittens 4 or 5 months after they were born. So just various unique behaviors like that I've been able to see through watching her.
How much research and reading do you do about species that you're interested in photographing before you head out and try to do that?
I think it's very dependent on the species and what I'm looking for. In the case of bobcats, I didn't do a lot. It was just a
Mhm.
matter of, just knowing like the basic right habitat, bobcats are found through many open spaces in the bay. So it's just, for bobcats, it was just about being able to go out enough, being able to,
Hmm.
read the landscape for clues, for to find bobcats. But for other species like great gray owls in Yosemite, which are much rarer and much harder to find, I would
Yeah,
spend hours looking through, old scientific reports, trying to understand their habitat preferences, going back to papers as old as 1970 to figure out, where exactly can I find this animal? So it's very dependent on the species and the system that you're working in.
very cool. So I know, I mean, technically, can you tell us a little bit about this photo? The lighting is pretty extraordinary. So maybe you can get into the technical details of how you got that backlighting.
Yeah, well, it wasn't really my choice. I had one angle to shoot, but then the sun was behind her. So,
Uh-huh.
I think what I had to be really careful about here in terms of technicality was to make sure the rim lighting across the bottom of the Bobcat wasn't too bright. So I had to
Mm,
make sure when I was in the field to underexpose just a little bit so that
mm,
the background and those highlights weren't too blown out. And then later in post processing I was able to brighten up the bobcat a bit while preserving most of the details along the edge of her body. So it was definitely a tricky lighting situation, but it ended up working out nicely. But it's something to always be aware for in the field. Make sure you're not blowing out the whites
hmm.
in a backlit situation like this.
Cool. All right, why don't we go on to the next one? Okay, tell us how you got this shot.
Well, it took about 16 months.
Yeah.
So in early 2022, I started my journey in DSLR camera trapping, which involves
Yeah.
using connecting a DSLR camera and flashes to a remote to a motion trigger. Um, so the motion trigger will set off the camera, which will take a picture, and then the flashes will fire, which will light up the scene. So I did this to start photographing mountain lions in the San Jose Hills close to my home, and in
Hmm.
particular, I was working at a UC reserve called Blue Oak Ranch Reserve, which is
Oh,
run by UC
wonderful.
Berkeley. So this photo was definitely a big case of trial and error and a lot of learning. So when I first started setting up camera traps, I had no clue where to set it up. I would just put one in the middle of the random field. I wouldn't know whether to look for trails, what kind of habitat to look for. And eventually, over time, I learned, mountain lions like traveling through canyons and ridge tops and other places where the topography kind of funnels them into a singular area.
Hmm.
So once I found a canyon with active mountain lion activity, which took me about 8 months to do, it was a matter of getting all my settings right on the DSLR camera trap to photograph the mountain lions. So um, in this case, this male mountain lion, he seemed to love giving me butt shots. So every single time, he'd always walk the opposite direction. I'd flip my camera around, he'd come the other way. I'd flip my camera around, he'd come the other way. So eventually, what I ended up doing was just putting two cameras in the canyon. And
Hmm.
I was lucky that my friend found this rocky ledge in the canyon. And there's actually during the winter, this spot is actually a waterfall. There's like water gushing over those rocks, and there's like a
Oh,
10-foot
wow.
drop behind the mountain line. So getting
Okay.
down to this location was like a safety hazard in itself.
Well,
Um, but once we discovered that the mountain lion was using this ledge, it was just a matter of getting down here, placing the camera, and waiting for him to eventually come, which he did. And I finally got the picture after 16 months of trying.
that's it. So, and when you say that, does that mean that you're heading out to Blue Oak weekly, or how much attention are camera traps do they need?
Well, the way I've made my setups, they can go 4 to 6 weeks in the field without being maintained. So I usually head out there maybe once a month,
Okay.
sometimes more frequently. So they don't require a ton of maintenance. It's just the initial setup that takes a lot of time.
And then you go get your cache of photos, and like how many hundreds or thousands of photos are we talking about from that period of time?
Well, the one nice thing about camera traps is they don't discriminate. So in the process of getting a mountain lion photo, you'll capture several other animals.
I'm
So,
sure.
usually there's like a couple of hundred photos. Most of them are out of
Okay.
focus birds or squirrels, but you'll occasionally in there you'll have a nice bobcat or a gray fox, and then when you're lucky, a mountain lion.
Wow. Wow. Um, so do you have concerns about leaving that kind of camera equipment out in that, for that many weeks, or is a place like the Blue Oak secure and you're not worried about it?
A place like Blue Oak is generally pretty secure. I'm more worried about the elements. Like, one
Mm,
time I placed my camera relatively low over a creek and the water level almost rose up to the point where my box was inundated, but I
wow.
narrowly managed to avoid that. There's other places where I have worked, like in Point Reyes, where I am a bit more concerned about that because there is
Mm,
public access. So it's definitely something to be aware of at all times.
mm, mhm. Have you seen a rise in interest in camera traps as a form of photography using camera traps? I mean, certainly they're used a lot in science in collecting population data, but just as a form of getting great photography.
Absolutely, yeah. It definitely seems to be more and more popular. I um I think there's various companies now focusing purely on making high quality DSLR camera traps for photographers, and it's
Mm,
just a way to capture animals that you can't really capture in person, like a mountain lion in California. And it's
yeah.
also a way to capture unique perspectives. A lot of
Mm,
telephoto lens wildlife photography starts to look the same after a while, kind of up close shots with a blurred out background. But camera trapping gives you a candid perspective. It allows you to incorporate more habitat into your images, and allows you to capture these
mm,
unique species and perspectives in a way that can't be done with telephoto lens photography. And I think more and more people are realizing that and starting to utilize this technique more.
very cool. All right, let's go to the next photo. So tell us what species we're seeing here, since it is not a Bay Area species. But wow.
So this is a great gray owl, and here in California, we have an endangered subspecies of great gray owl called Strix nebulosa yosemitensis. So the nearest great gray owls are typically a holarctic species. So um, the nearest great gray owl populations that we see are in southern Oregon, but Yosemite
Mm,
and the greater Yosemite area has an isolated subspecies of these owls that number around 200 birds, and
wow.
they are endangered by listed by the state, and they're very vulnerable to threats like vehicle collisions, especially. So this makes this bird, like they're a beautiful bird, and the fact that they're so rare makes them, a highly desired bird to see by birders, and also like a great conservation concern. So I've been fortunate enough to, see several of these owls over the years in Yosemite and recently work with the National Park Service on a photo project on them. And in this particular case, this was during the pandemic, and my dad and I were watching this female owl hunting in a meadow. Now, this owl's
Wow.
mate had just died a month earlier, so she was
Mm,
raising her chick all by herself. And most park biologists believe that the chick wouldn't make it, given how young she was and the fact that there wasn't a male to provide for them
yeah.
at the time because the female usually needs to stay on the nest to take care of the chick, but she couldn't afford to do that since the male wasn't bringing in food. So we kind of watched from a distance as the female was hunting for her chick, and she soon made her way to the small meadow, which was carpeted with wildflowers. And as we watched her hunt, we noticed this one patch of wildflowers we really wanted her to dive into. And she dove in once, but then I missed the shot. But then she happened to do it a second time, and I was ready when she took off, and I was able to capture this picture of her flying over the wildflowers. She missed the prey this time, but she ended up eventually catching the prey
Mm,
on a later attempt and giving it to her chick.
wow. How long were you and your dad able to watch her over what period of time?
Well, we watched the progression of the family
Yeah.
over multiple months, from maybe the start of May to the start of July. But in this particular morning, we got to watch her for about 3 hours. So
And did her chick fledge?
her chick did successfully
Oh my
fledge.
gosh.
Yes, her chick
Wow.
successfully fledged a few days after I got this picture, and it was really exciting. And she defied all the odds to make that happen.
That's amazing. One of so how did you get this classic wildlife photo, right? I mean, this is the classic action shot that I think everybody who's pursuing this hobby or profession, seeks to know how to do. How'd you do it?
So this one was a tricky one too because it was
Mm,
relatively dark and overcast this day, and I
mm,
needed to make sure I had a fast enough shutter speed so I could capture the owl in action. So it required me using a higher ISO than I normally like to use, but that would ensure that I would freeze the motion perfectly when the
mm,
owl was in flight. If there had been more light, it might have been easier to work with, but the key was to, not be scared to raise the ISO. In order to get the
mm.
shutter speed, I need to really capture the owl in motion because if there was a slower shutter speed, this photo would have been a blurry mess. So
Yep, yep. Okay, why don't we go to the next one? This of the photos that you've selected to talk about today, this one just kind of takes my breath away. You want to talk about this?
Yeah. So first, I want to say many people think this is a grizzly bear. It is not. It is a
No.
black bear. It is a cinnamon-colored black bear that I was fortunate enough to photograph in the Lassen area. I was with my
Nice.
dad looking for wolves actually, and well, we didn't see any wolves on this particular trip. We saw this bear grazing at the edge of a meadow. Now, this is the biggest black bear I've seen by a large margin. I've seen countless black bears here in California, but this guy was definitely the biggest. And he was grazing at the edge of the meadow when our um, when we when we pulled over in our vehicle. And this isn't an area that sees a lot of people, so he was definitely curious by us. So he
Mm.
gave us, a nice long glance before he went back to feeding at the edge of the meadow. And this photo was taken from close to my vehicle at a healthy distance, which is always important when photographing wildlife.
And can you talk a little bit about um, the importance or the value of getting an animal to look straight at you, which you capture in many of your images. And I know, we think about that a lot at Bay Nature in terms of the wildlife photos that we are looking for, that there's always such power in an image where you really have the animal looking at you.
Yeah, so I mean, I think eyes are one of, if not the most important part of a wildlife image. I don't think eye contact is always necessary to create an
Mm-hmm.
impactful image, but in many cases it is. For someone like me who generally focuses on taking portraits of wildlife, having eyes is essential because eyes are very expressive. The eyes often tell a story, and it's like through the eyes you can almost see what this animal is thinking and kind of put yourself in that animal's shoes. Like eyes can show curiosity, eyes can show fear, eyes can show
Mm-hmm.
focus. They can show so many things. So I think it's really important in a lot of cases to have eye contact in your portraits, and I think it's also important to get eye contact naturally. You don't want to force the animal to look at you, but if the animal is just doing what's natural to it, it can and often does look your way, and that's when you can get that photo that you're hoping for.
Mm. Also, I've been hearing you mention your dad a lot. Is he also a photographer? Do you guys do this together?
Yeah, my dad is a landscape photographer.
Mm.
He he helped teach me a lot of what I know about photography. He often does join me on wildlife photography expeditions, and many of the photos I've taken were along with him. And he's also started taking wildlife photos as well. But I definitely learned a lot about what I know through photography from him, and he's been very supportive of me as I've pursued this.
Do you have thoughts about that, about having mentors or a partner or how to learn about photography? I mean, really, it being in this case sounds like a joint pursuit. And you really had a teacher with you at your side and how to cultivate that.
Yeah, so I think having some kind of teacher or mentor in photography is definitely very helpful. I've been fortunate to have many people teach and mentor me throughout my photography career. And yeah, there's just so much you can learn by having someone more experienced than you teach you. So I think it's always a great idea to seek out mentors and, people who can, guide you through this journey because I think especially in the case of wildlife photography, which has so many not only technical components but just requires so much time out in the field, so much time exploring. It's really good to have people along your side to share that journey with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And those adventures, I would think. Um, okay, what else would you like to tell us about this image?
Hmm.
I'm not get. Is there anything technical about it? It looks like a pretty straightforward shot in terms of the lighting.
Yeah, so this image was it is like a fairly big crop. I was pretty far away, so I did crop this
Mm,
image quite a bit, and I think it was relatively dark when I took this image, so it was close to sunset, so I was shooting with a slow shutter speed, and I did need to rest my camera on the hood of the car to
Mm,
make sure I was stable enough to, capture it at such a low shutter speed. And I think that was the main like technical aspect of this image. I hoped to I hoped to find a more clear background for this shot, but
mm.
I I didn't really have like I couldn't find like a better angle. But yeah, that's kind of the technicalities behind this image.
And I'm seeing that, we're all seeing the burned tree. And so was this after the fires that swept through Lassen?
Yes, yeah. So this was
Okay.
actually right on the edge of the Dixie Fire burn, and Dixie Fire was
Hmm.
one of the worst fires we've had in that region in a very long time. Um, And yeah, I think this photo does show a story of like resilience. This this green grass was probably just a bunch of ash not too long before this
Hmm.
picture was taken. And like a lot of this area surrounding this was just barren, burnt, area. So it was really cool to see wildlife, continuing to exist despite, how terrible that fire was and, how much destruction it caused to the
Hmm.
ecosystem.
And was the bear foraging? And if
The
so, what do you think it was foraging for?
the bear was foraging. He was foraging at the edge of a meadow. So one ecological benefit of these fires is that, it can improve feeding in meadows. And in
Hmm.
this case, I think this bear was just foraging on, the various grasses and plants in, the meadow. Um,
Mm.
a majority of a significant majority of black bear diet is um, plants, is like herbivorous. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Cool. Very cool. Okay, why don't we go to the next one? Oh, okay. So give us the backstory on this. This is a stunning image.
Yeah, so this was a photo that also took a very, very long time to get. So here in the Bay Area, we don't get to see much snow, and photographing wildlife in the snow is every photographer's dream. So I have to go to Yosemite to try
What?
to do
How
that.
come? How come?
Well, just because snow, provides like a really nice natural contrast, and
Mm,
I think maybe in the Bay Area, since we don't get much snow, I wanted more compared to someone in like the Yukon Territory or something who
right.
has a lot of snow. So, but yeah, I think for me, I really enjoy the natural contrast that snow provides.
Mm,
And I've always wanted to capture an image of a bobcat in the snow, and the place to do that here in California is Yosemite National Park. So I started trying to search and try to get this image back in March of 2017 when my dad and I were
wow.
hiking, and someone told us, "Oh, we just saw a bobcat up the trail." And that's kind of when I started to think, okay, I want a bobcat image in the snow. And over the years, I keep visiting Yosemite in the winter a few times, and I didn't see my first bobcat in the park until November 2020. And this bobcat, I saw it, just after dark. It was like way too dark to take any kind of picture, but it was a really close encounter and cool to see, and it kind of motivated me more. And then
Mm.
fast forward to October 2021, I see my second bobcat in Yosemite, and this is after like several dozen trips. And
And is this like over the course of those dozen trips, are you start scoping out where you think bobcats might be?
I think, a lot of the scoping out I did beforehand, just by looking at like social media posts or iNaturalist to see
Mm,
where people had seen bobcats in the park. It was just more of a process of repetition of being able to go to the spots enough to put myself to get, to put myself in a position to get lucky and see one.
mm, hmm,
So
hmm.
yeah, so then October 2021 is when I saw my second bobcat in the park, but there was no snow on the ground again. And then fast forward to January 2022, I'd spent maybe 7 or 8 days in the park hiking in the snow. Sometimes it was like
Wow.
3, 4 feet. And then while I'm walking back, to the bus stop at like in the late afternoon, I spot this bobcat sitting under a rock on the side of the trail. And the squirrels in the tree up above him are barking
Nice.
oh, there's a bobcat here. And
All
then
their alarm calls. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So then this bobcat's like, I've been made, and then decides to move on, and he starts walking down the trail right towards me. So I quietly move off the trail and just lay down flat on my stomach, and this bobcat just proceeds to walk down the trail right past me. And that's when I took
Wow.
this picture. And then just 20 minutes down the trail, I encounter another bobcat. So in like one day, I saw as many bobcats as I'd seen in the park, and compared to like 4 years before, like in a 4 year time period before that. So it was a really special encounter and a great feeling to get this picture after trying for so long.
And that it was just happenstance, right? I mean, you can have all the naturalist skills in the world, and sometimes it just happens randomly.
Exactly, exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
so you know, this makes me think of the piece that we ran in the fall issue of Bay Nature by Sarah Killingsworth, who another wildlife photographer in the Bay Area, who you've talked to about these issues of wildlife photography and hotspots. And sometimes hotspots are generated through social media, or everybody finds out that there's a place where the bald eagle is nesting, and a lot of people can turn up, and it can become potentially a negative situation for the wildlife. And just, can you talk about some of those concerns and issues and what you've seen or not seen around those issues?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely an issue for sure, and I've definitely been noticing it more post-pandemic as this becomes a
Mhm.
much more popular activity.
Yeah.
For example, there's a bald eagle nest that's like 5 minutes from my home. I could walk there,
No.
but
Wow.
I've never visited just because it's become so popular with photographers and birders. You know, every time I go there, there's like maybe 10 people standing watching the nest, and I don't really feel like I want to be a part of that. I think it's important to, respect wildlife, give them their space, and, not follow the crowds because, crowds can and often do have an impact, and there's many examples of this. So I do my own with my own wildlife photography, I'm almost always alone or with a few friends. I try to avoid the popular crowded hotspots. Um,
Hmm.
and for almost all of these pictures that I've taken here, it was either just me or with one other person. And I think it's important that, people don't just follow the crowds, but, seek their own locations, their own places, their own stories, and, you know, just try to find, something that's, more unique to you instead of following the crowds, which not only harms wildlife, but also, you'll get the same picture as like 20 other people. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what would you consider a crowd? Like, how is a crowd defined in this context? And
You know, I
while you're answering, the sun has just illuminated and broken through the clouds, and I'm gonna put down the blind. But please go ahead and answer.
I think it's very dependent on the individual. I think for me, a crowd is like maybe more than three people counting myself. But I think for some people it might be 10, for some people it might be 20. So
Mm,
I think it's very dependent. I think, you know, when I'm out in the field, I like to really be in tune with nature and be in tune with wildlife. And I don't think I can really
mm,
do that with many people around me. I think,
hmm.
when I'm by myself or with a few people, we can really read the animal's behavior the best and know what's not only best for us to get the photos we want, but most importantly, what's best for that animal's welfare. So I think I would say for me, a crowd is like more than like three people, but I think that could definitely vary based off, the individual.
Yeah. So I know some of Sarah's recommendations in that essay were about that if you're seeing more than five people, then just, decide not to go to that spot that day, or coordinate with other photographers about, maybe when to go. And with the idea that, obviously everybody's out there doing this because they love the wildlife. And how do we do it in a way that uh, cares for it? Okay, we are getting very close to me no longer asking all the questions, and you all who are listening getting to ask Vishal whatever's on your mind. And it can be anything from more about the wildlife to technical questions. And I know we've got all sorts of levels of skill out there. So let me take a look at our list of questions coming in. We have one from Lisa who asks, I love your work equipment question. May I ask what model of camera and lens, parenthetical length, that you use? Time to upgrade mine. Thank you.
I use a Nikon D850 mirrorless camera body. Not mirrorless, it's sorry, it's not a mirrorless camera body. It's a DSLR camera body and a 500 millimeter PF prime lens. So that's like a 500 equivalent focal length on a full frame camera body.
Cool. We have a question from Kelly who says, what software do you use to efficiently review photos from a camera trap? Good question.
Um, I should have a better answer to this, but I honestly just look on my Finder on my Mac and then I pick a couple photos I like and I put them into Lightroom and then the rest just sit on my hard drive somewhere for eternity. So it's definitely not like a good workflow and I don't recommend that. But yeah, sorry I can't be more help there.
Kelly, if you have suggestions, please put them in in the chat or in the Q&A and we'll share them with the group. Um, we have a question from Mary. She says, do the animals seem to react to the camera flashes? Curious if they avoid them and make it harder to get images.
It's a great question. So one of the reasons I was
Mm-hmm.
hesitant to go into camera trapping initially is because I thought, surely that the animals wouldn't like the flashes. But as I learned more about it, I learned that if you place the flashes are often placed high, like well above the animal's eye level at like typically I place them like 5 to 10 feet above the ground. And then they're
Mm,
also done in a very low intensity. So most animals I've seen don't seem to mind the soft flashing at all. They're often curious about the click of the camera shutter from the that comes from the box. So I
mm.
often see them kind of curiously investigating that. But the flashes haven't seemed to bother most animals that I've seen so far. So they seem to still walk those routes normally without, without any issues.
Um, okay, we have another question from Bart. What was the shutter speed and ISO for the owl picture?
Oh, picture.
The great owl,
I think I'll need
the
to
great gray.
double check this after, but I think the ISO was 1250 and the shutter speed was 1 by 1600.
Okay. We have another question from Kirsten. She says, beautiful work. Thank you for sharing. What is the highest ISO and lowest shutter speed range that you've had success with in low light?
I think for shutter speed, I'm able to go down to like a 1/30th of a second,
Hmm.
which I I like don't recommend doing unless it's absolutely necessary. But I can like if I take like 30 pictures at 1 by 30th of a second, one shot will maybe come out okay. And then in terms of
Hmm.
ISO, for my Nikon D850, I don't like pushing it above 3200. For some of the newer mirrorless cameras, you can definitely go more than that, but that's kind of the capability limit of my camera. So I would say ISO 3200 and 1 by 30th of a second are kind of my maximums for both those settings.
Do you have a lot of different cameras or just one camera, a lot of different lenses?
I just have one camera and
Hmm.
one lens. For my telephoto photography, I have various cameras for my camera traps, but those are
Yeah,
all like older models and stuff. Yeah.
yeah. Wow. Okay. Uh, Shruti asks, what's the most elusive animal you've been able to capture? What a good question.
Elusive animals. So I would say in person, the most elusive animal I've seen would be probably a Canada lynx. I was fortunate enough to go with my dad to the Yukon Territory one winter and we were able to spot four lynx. So I would say that was one of the most elusive animals and just like a really incredible thing to see. They'd been on my bucket list for a long time. In terms of on a camera trap, I would say it was a melanistic leopard I was able to photograph on my camera trap while I was visiting family in India. I was able to photograph um, a rare melanistic leopard on a tea estate with my camera trap. So I would say those two probably are pretty high up there.
Well, and I have to tease a little bit the mountain beaver. which we Bay Nature and Vishal have been having a conversation for many, many months as he has worked really hard to get a shot of a mountain beaver out in Point Reyes National Seashore. And I will let you take the story from there, Vishal.
Yeah, those guys are very hard to work with. It seems like every time we figure them out, they just like
Well, first of all,
vanish.
tell people what a mountain beaver is. A lot of people don't know.
Yeah, so I didn't even know what a mountain beaver was until I started this project. But mountain beavers are a species of rodent that's in their entirely own genus Apledontia, and they're thought to be the most primitive rodent species in the world. Um, and Point Reyes National Seashore has its own subspecies of mountain beaver, which is not found anywhere else. And the nearest other population is in Point Arena, which is, I think, like 70 miles north. So
Mhm.
these mountain beavers are, extremely cryptic, elusive animals, and we've been utilizing camera traps to try to film them. But we found a lot of cool things through this process, such as the fact that they act as ecosystem engineers, making habitat for various other species that use their burrows, such as long-tailed weasels, rabbits, and more. But
Hmm.
they've been very difficult to camera trap a lot of the time because they just don't spend a lot of time above ground. It just seems to be
Mm.
quick spurts in and out. So they're truly comfortable and at home underground where I can't see them and capture them. So yeah, I hope the conversation will end soon when I actually get the pictures, but until then.
I don't know, it's just furthered my appreciation for the challenge of this work.
Mhm.
Okay, other questions. Ron asks, for DSLR camera or trail cams, how do you protect the camera from the rain? And do you use accessory power?
So I build housing from pelican cases. So I'll take like a pelican case, like drill a hole in it,
What is a
and
pelican case?
it's like a case, it's like these waterproof cases that are used, to store a variety of things.
Okay.
So like, they're fairly common in any hardware store. So pretty much like you can take a pelican case, drill a hole in it, put some plumbing ducts to act as like a kind of like a hood for your lens, and then pretty much the camera will sit inside that pelican case, and then you'll put some kind of acrylic or filter at the end of that duct or at the hole to prevent water from getting in from the front.
Mm.
And then the Pelican cases are generally pretty airtight, so they'll prevent rain from getting in there. And usually your camera will, in the case of mine, my camera sits in a tripod plate that I've, glued into the Pelican case. So that's how I keep my camera weatherproof. And in the case of the flashes, I use electrical boxes, which have just some foam in them and the flashes in those.
Cool. Wow. And then Ron actually has a follow-up. He's wondering, where else have you shown your photos besides Bay Nature?
I've shown my photos in various locations. I've in I've had photos in Audubon, in San
Mm,
Jose
wow,
Mercury News, East Bay Times, and then most recently a feature in Breakthroughs Magazine, which is a magazine run by the College of Natural Resources where I study.
very cool. Let's see. So we're rounding the bend here. And let's see. Somebody asked, "Do you have a favorite time of year for taking photos in Yosemite and in the Bay Area?"
Um, in Yosemite, I like the winter just because there's less people and there's snow, which is nice.
Hmm.
The one downside of winter in Yosemite is you can't find the great gray owls in winter typically, but I would say winter is overall like my favorite season there for everything else. Um, in terms of the Bay Area, I also like the winter, there's just it's easier to find bobcats and other mammals and um, oftentimes the light is good enough that you can shoot all day. So that's nice. So yeah, I really like the winter.
Why is it easier to find mammals in the Bay Area in winter? That's interesting.
Well, it definitely depends on the species, but
Sure.
in the case of Bobcats, I think a lot of it is just due to the fact that they're shorter grass, so they're easier to spot.
Hmm.
Um, and then I think they like to avoid the cold, so you'll often see them out like midday. So like on an average winter day, I won't spot a bobcat typically till 10 or 11 a.m. when the sun is out more and they're more active. So I think there's a more constrained time period in where they're active and they're easier to spot.
Hmm. Hmm. And then with the great gray owls in Yosemite, why are they not there in the winter or
They're
harder to see?
they're generally not there in the winter because they move downslope to lower elevations in the Sierra foothills. They
Wow.
can they can still be there some winters, but it's generally pretty uncommon. And their home range becomes a lot wider, and they tend to move to more downslope locations below the snow line.
How big is that population again?
The most recent estimate was 100 to 200 pairs.
Amazing. Okay, let's see. We have Andrew asks, Vishal, thank you so much for your brilliant work and this wonderful presentation. I'm so inspired. Any recommendations on maximizing frame rate, frame per second on a given camera? Also, well, I'll let you answer that first, and then I'll get to the second part.
The frames per second is just dependent on what camera model you have. Each camera model has like a maximum frames per second. And I think for a few camera models like my own, like you can get like a particular battery type which can increase it by a couple of frames, but I don't
Mm.
think that's like the general thing. So it's very dependent on which camera body you choose to buy, and frames per second is definitely like a very important thing to consider when purchasing a camera body for wildlife photography.
And the other part of Andrew's question is also, do you have a favorite perspective when photographing our animal brethren? Much appreciated.
My favorite perspective is always low.
Mm.
I've hurt my back many times by just laying down flat on the ground, because you wanna be eye level with that animal. It gives the image a lot more meaning and impact, and it's more powerful. You wanna be level with that animal instead of above it. So eye level is always the way to go, and that's kind of what I try to do in all my images, whether it's in person or camera trap.
Very cool. Let's see. And a nice comment from Juliet. She says, not a question, just a huge thank you to Vishal for his time, expertise, ecological commitment, and compassion. Looking forward to all we still see and hear from him in the future. That was really nice to hear.
Thank you,
Um,
Juliet.
and then last question is an anonymous person who says, your photos and storytelling are powerful. What do you hope to achieve? Or what do you hope changes with your photos? That's a good final question.
I hope, to help connect more people to the natural world and to get people as excited about wildlife and conservation as I am, because I think more than anything, we don't have a lack of science. We don't have a lack of research. What we have is, not enough people feeling connected to nature, not enough people caring about wildlife and nature. And I'm hoping through my photos, I can give people a glimpse into the natural world that, connects them and inspires them to care. Because the truth is, we can't live without nature. We can't live without biodiversity. And if I can get a few more people to care about wildlife, to feel more connected to nature, I'll have accomplished my goal through my photography.
Well, and if you talk about your own, now we're coming really full circle here, your own journey of as a younger person, you are still a young person, seeing wildlife documentaries and photos and whatnot, and then sort of that leap from being an observer to being out in the field and observing. How do you hope that your photography moves people, from looking at the page to being outdoors?
I kind of hope to accomplish that, by kind of telling compelling stories
Mhm.
about, and I think actively giving people ways to be involved, like make them feel like they can have an impact in some way, shape, or form. I think a lot of times in this field we can feel powerless about, everything that's happening around us. But I want to show people that we're not powerless and that, if we put our heads together, we can make a difference, we can have an impact, and we can make this world a better place for wildlife and nature.
Are there, since we have a minute or two left, are there any specific species that you photographed or shown us images of today that you sort of want to talk about the conservation story around them and what you hope people, the challenges that they're facing and that you want people to know about?
Yeah, I think a great example of that is the great gray owl. So I've
Mm-hmm.
been fortunate enough to collaborate with the National Park Service on a photo story about the great gray owls and how they're being impacted by vehicle collisions. Because most people, they don't imagine owls being hit by cars. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
many of the audience members have been to Yosemite National Park, but so many of people don't know that these owls exist, and they're being hit by cars on the very roads that hundreds and thousands, hundreds of people drive every single day. So I'm hopeful to that story, people can be aware that these owls are here, that they're being impacted, and maybe it'll help people drive a little bit slower. Maybe it'll help, have like a slower speed limit at some of these particular areas. Just things like that, making people aware that these animals exist and what's impacting them, and how, we can all take small steps to help make a difference for these animals.
And does that seem like a significant part of the solution is slowing down in the case of
Um,
the owls and car strikes?
I think it could be. The science is, still not exactly clear yet on what exactly the best solution is, but I think slowing down definitely never hurts, and
Yeah.
it could be a solution to that. It's hard to say definitively until more of the research is done, but I think the first step, like anything, is creating awareness because there's not going to be a major effort to protect the species if people don't even know it exists and people don't even know what
Yeah.
challenges it's facing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I think that we will leave it there. Vishal, thank you so much. You're really an inspiration, and I feel lucky. Bay Nature feels lucky that you are part of our local community, and we're excited to see more of your work. So,
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to be here with the Bay Nature community.
yep, great. All right. Good night. And everyone else, thanks so much for attending our talk today. This concludes our hour together. We want to thank you again for donating, for attending. Um, and in the coming days, just look out for the email that we'll be sending you that has a link back to this webinar. So anything you want to re-listen to, but certainly any of that technical information will be on hand for you. And please feel free to share and let others know about it. And yeah, thank you. And I hope that you find joy in nature in the last few days of 2023. Thanks so much and good night.